Welcome to this week's episode of the Jewish Diaspora Report. On this week's episode, we look into how the delay game might be over. Let's get started. For many of my listeners, you may remember an episode we did a couple of weeks ago called The Delay Game. The Delay Game, if you want to go back and listen to it, is about how President Trump and the United States seem to create a pretty smart tactic against the Iranian regime. They decided to do what the Iranian regime always does, which is delay, delay, delay. But interestingly, many of you this week probably have noticed that the delay seems to be over. The 14-point plan that the United States apparently agreed to with Iran, according to President Trump, is now in the trash. It is no longer valid. The ceasefire is supposedly over. Many of my listeners have reached out through Instagram and to direct messages and asked for my take on what's been going on, what's physically happening since they can't trust the social media world, but also, what does this mean? So as much as I hate doing episodes just repeating why things are failing, why the Arab world and Israel's enemies just for some reason continue to break ceasefires, and then of course blame Israel for breaking ceasefires, I think it's probably a good idea just to give you a small update on what's been going on and what it might mean. Where we left off in the last episode was the apparent agreement between Iran and the United States to ceasefire, to open the Straits of Hormuz, and to start negotiating a plan for how they're going to end this conflict permanently. Unfortunately, as can be somewhat expected when you're dealing with a rogue state like Iran and the Iranian regime, it didn't last very long. Because, despite the fact that the Straits of Hormuz were supposed to be opened once the agreement was signed, it didn't really happen. Just for context, so you might understand how many ships go through the Straits of Hormuz, it's about 100 to 130 ships per day on a normal day. Immediately after signing this memorandum of understanding between the two countries, which was supposed to see the straits completely opened, only 25 ships per day went through. And this didn't change all that much over the last few weeks because right now it's about 20 to 30 ships going through per day. This is 17% of what's supposed to be going through the Straits of Hormuz. So Iran really hasn't kept up their end of the bargain. But to be fair, the talks fell apart pretty much immediately. Once the signed agreement came into effect, both sides were supposed to come together in order to discuss a full, future, permanent solution. The problem was, this lasted about a day. The US claims that Iran effectively derailed the process by attacking commercial ships while attempting to negotiate. Later in the episode, we'll explain why this is happening and who is doing it. Iran claims that the US violated the spirit of the agreement by resuming strikes, reinstating sanctions, and failing to implement promised relief. So, despite the fact that both sides are claiming the other side broke the deal, probably because the deal sort of made no sense, didn't really have a lot of detail, so therefore there's a lot of wiggle room for things to go wrong, or for the other side to blame you for not doing your part. But the deal itself seems to be dead. If you listen to the previous podcast episode, or frankly, a lot of my episodes that talk about these ceasefire deals, you will realize that Iran was attempting to delay, which is kind of their thing. While the negotiations were happening, satellite images have shown that they have been rebuilding their nuclear facilities. Or attempting to. They've been attempting to dig out the damaged nuclear stuff that they need to continue to create missiles and nuclear weapons. This is not at all new. Iran has been doing this for years. You make a temporary deal, you make some sort of agreement to get the other guys off your back, continue in secret to fix things, improve things, or even build a nuclear weapon, which we know they were doing. But the point that I was making in that previous episode was the fact that the Americans were kind of doing the same thing this time, for the first time ever. Very smartly, they were delaying also in order to get past the next election. And I think the Iranians kind of figured it out. They realize that the Americans can claim a small victory, the straits are open, they still have the ability to strike if they want to, whenever they want, and Iran gets kind of nothing in return. The promise for maybe future sanctions relief, and a few other things that could happen if the agreement and the negotiations go the right way. Just like Iran has done in the past, the United States could drag their feet on negotiations and take forever until the end of the next election cycle. Once the midterms are done and there's no political blowback for going back to war, in theory, the United States goes back to war. So I think Iran figured out that they were kind of being played. And this is why they didn't open the Straits of Hormuz. And this is also why, after they got frustrated at the fact that things weren't going their way and that talks had fallen apart, they started to attack ships in the Straits of Hormuz. It's kind of their only card at this point. In response to probably realizing that they were being played, they realized that they should start attacking ships again in order to bring their issue back up to the surface. We don't want the Americans to get away with lower gas prices, Trump gets a victory, the anti-Western protesters don't have any fake dead babies to use in their protests in order to criticize and blame the government. We want to make sure that Americans are struggling, or else what are we doing here? I also think that they misunderstand Donald Trump and the United States right now. They are used to presidents from the past who have been willing to put everything aside, appease rogue nations and dictators, with the unofficial promise that if you leave us alone and don't cause any problems, we won't bother you either. This kind of goes for people like Hamas and Hezbollah and people like that as well, who like to do these things where they'll poke and poke, shoot a rocket here, do a terrorist attack there, and hope that they don't reach a level that's going to get a response, so they can continue to attack and fight and say they're winning without actually being punished in any way. Sadly, this is the same thing that Israel's been doing against Hamas and Hezbollah for years. While the international world stops them from actually responding, it takes 20 years and then eventually a war breaks out. So I actually think that Iran is shocked and scared that the Americans are actually fighting back. They are not going to this old-fashioned style of, okay, as long as you hit only a few ships, or as long as you only do little things, we won't actually do anything bad back because we don't want the press, we don't want the issues with the economy, we don't want our people to get into war and be angry. You might have some Instagram influencers or podcasters against you, God forbid. But they definitely underestimated Donald Trump, who is willing to put his money where his mouth is. If we tell you that you better get to the negotiation table and not waste our time or else we will strike back, he actually struck back. And I think they didn't expect it. And unfortunately now for the Iranian regime, they're kind of stuck. The delay game that they are used to playing and getting away with isn't working anymore. If you don't get to the negotiation table, we will continue to fight. If you continue to hit ships in the Straits of Hormuz, we will strike back. We don't care about the public pressure. We are now in a very interesting place, which is that Iran realizes that the United States is willing to strike back without any kind of concern for public backlash, that they cannot continue to strike targets in the Straits of Hormuz without being punished in return, and they're kind of stuck. They really have no other cards to play. The Straits of Hormuz is sort of their big thing that they can do to try and destabilize the world and cause pressure and pain. So since that's not working, we've seen an escalation, which is going back to full-out war, shooting missiles and rockets at Arab countries. This past week, the Iranian regime launched massive waves of missiles and drones at Oman, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, and Jordan. This was in response to the fact that the Americans were striking the Iranian targets for the Straits of Hormuz attacks. One thing you'll notice that's missing from that list is Israel. Many people might be asking, well, why are they striking Arab countries and not Israel? That's the little Satan. That's the terrible country that we are trying to destroy. But the reality is, they're not stupid. They know that if they strike Israel, Israel is ready to go to war, and they've said it very clearly. They know that if they strike Israel with even the slightest attempt, that Israel will open up this war and go back to destroying them. And they don't want that. What they do want is they want to put enough pressure on the Arab states by hitting the Arab states for those Arab states to then have to go to the Americans and beg them to stop. like we saw in the past. They are hoping the pressure from the Arab states will stop the United States. I guess we will see how that goes. But what is very clear here is that they want nothing to do with Israel. They do not want Israel back into this war. What they really want is for the United States to go back to ignoring all of the issues they're causing, allow them to rebuild, give them that time to delay and play the delay game, as always, so they can get ready for their next round of fighting. So now that we see the delay game that Iran attempts to play is not going to work, and that US will actually back up their threats with real action, what does this mean for the future? What do we see coming next? According to many reports, it seems like in Iran, there is a massive issue between the IRGC leadership, this is the Revolutionary Guard, versus the civilian government. As is the case in pretty much every Arab and Islamic terror group, there seems to be always a political wing and an armed wing. When you think of the government, the non-IRGC leaders, they want to stay in power. They're politicians. They get tons of money. They have tons of power. Their family lives across the world in beautiful penthouses, driving nice cars. They want to keep their life. They don't want to die in a war. They'd like to stay alive. And they want their family to continue to get that kind of money. On the other hand, you have the IRGC, which are a little bit more crazy and want to make sure that the other side, whether it's Israel or America or even the Arab world who goes against Iran, the Sunnis, they want them all dead. They really aren't as pragmatic to try and make peace deals or deals that'll stop them from doing what they want to do, which is kill everybody else. According to some reporting, the New York Times and others have reported that the Iranian president has verbally threatened the supreme leader with resignation during these talks. According to that New York Times report, they suggest the president warned that the United States naval blockade that was on the Straits of Hormuz was economically crippling and stated that he would resign if the IRGC hardliners interfered with any agreement that would allow that strait to be opened. This is a perfect example of the infighting that I was just talking about. You have the government who's saying we need to stay in power, we need money, we need to run an economy. And on the other hand, you have IRGC people that are saying, no way we can make a deal. We don't care. Let this country burn. This is why we saw the IRGC attacking ships in the Straits of Hormuz, even while the political side was trying to create a deal. This rift is a very big problem for the Iranian regime, because there's no way they're going to make any kind of deal with these hardliners unwilling to make any kind of agreement. On the other hand, the Americans are not going to allow the president and the foreign minister to keep delaying and delaying and delaying like they used to. So they are kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, they are not allowed to make a deal, according to the IRGC leaders. And on the other hand, their typical tactics of delay with the Americans is not working, and it's going to lead to strikes. But the one thing that this is suggesting is the fact that the pressure campaign by Israel and the United States, despite what you hear in the media, is actually working. When everybody said regime change and people laughed and said there's no way that this is going to happen, this, in theory, is the beginning of regime change, whether it's the political side completely being destroyed or the IRGC side being destroyed. When you have two warring factions within the government, this is what brings down governments. Obviously, we don't know who's going to win this battle. You have on the one side the IRGC, who are crazy and are backed up by the likely dead or incredibly disfigured leader of the Iranian regime. And on the other hand, you have the political leaders who are aiming just to stay alive at this point, physically and metaphorically. So either the IRGC officially takes over all control, which will mean that there's likely zero chance for any kind of agreement, and we go back to war, or somehow by some miracle, the political people take over and they make a deal that'll likely be probably terrible. It'll be some type of way that they can delay and delay and delay so they can go back to fighting in the future. But at least it pushes it down the road 10 or 15 years. Something like the Obama nuclear deal, for example. Because as much as these people are political and they want to stay in power, they're obviously still part of the Iranian regime, and they still want to take down the West. the rare chance that maybe somehow the Persian people and the Iranian people rise up against them and take over the halls of power might still also be an option. When you have two warring parties trying to war with each other, maybe the people can kind of sneak in and take over. It might be a poor analogy or a poor comparison, but what I will say is this has happened before. In the 1930s, when there were two warring parties in Germany, it was Hitler who snuck into power between two different rival parties. So it's not impossible to think when the IRGC and the Iranian government somehow has infighting, that somebody can rise up and take over power. It has happened before. Let's hope this time for better. There is always the crazy chance that if this war kicks off once again, that the Americans and the Israelis take out some of the political leaders like they have in Hamas and Hezbollah, and in return, maybe somebody moves up the ranks who's more willing to make a deal in order to allow them to be some sort of figurehead. I'm willing to be a puppet of the Americans, to be rich and control a country. I'll give freedom to the people as long as I get to be the leader. And this isn't such a crazy idea. We're seeing that right now in Syria, where someone was allowed to be a leader just because he was better than the last guy, and he promised freedom and safety and hope for all in Syria. And just this past week, the French president went there to go and sit down with him, despite the fact that he used to be a terrorist, and still, unfortunately, has a little bit of a poor human rights record in his current administration. So is it crazy to think that someone in Iran might do the same? It's possible. In the end, this past week has shown that things in Iran are definitely not going well for the Iranian regime. Whether this delay game that they're used to playing isn't working anymore, and the Americans are willing to put their money where their mouth is, or the fact that the IRGC and the leaders are not getting along, and they're probably going to start taking each other out pretty quick. These are all signs of a country that's on the tipping point of complete collapse. Their economy is failing, their government is completely falling apart, they are becoming factioned and going against one another, and all the while it seems like their pressure campaign and their delay tactics are not working against this American administration. And the simple fact that they won't strike the state of Israel kind of shows how they feel about this whole thing. They want to do enough damage just to kind of cause problems, especially for the Americans, but they don't want Israel involved because they know that they will be done for. This is kind of like uncharted waters here. This is like when you get an old, sick animal stuck in the corner of a cage and you can't get them out, and you have no idea what they're going to do. They could do anything. This Iranian regime is in big trouble, and they clearly know it. None of their old tactics are working. They don't have on the other side an America and an Israel that are unwilling to go to war and to strike when need be. Nearly all of their usual tricks are completely thrown in the garbage. And it seems like they know that this delay game might be over. This has been another episode of the Jewish Diaspora Report. Don't forget to check us out on social media at jdr.podcast and check out some of our other episodes on your favorite podcast source. We'll see you next time.